Hey all, it's Matt, your average gamer. This week, Elden Ring received a big patch, and it was mostly PvP based. However, there was one major PvE change that happened in 1.10, critical hit builds. This greatly impacts those builds that involve posture breaking because their biggest benefit is critical damage. Before we continue though, I'd like to mention the amazing VPN I've been using lately, ExpressVPN. You can keep your browsing safe with this awesome VPN, and there's 3 extra months free in the description below. As you can see here, we get a different kind of critical using the Executioner's Great Axe on the Draconic Tree Sentinel. This does massive damage in the end and ends the fight, which is relatively short. The Executioner's Great Axe has a 115 critical multiplier, so it's excellent for heavy damage critical attacks. The Draconic Tree Sentinel would fall fairly quickly to our powerful build, and we did notice the extra critical damage after he had his posture break, which is slightly different than most normal bosses as far as the horseback posture breaking. Next up, I took on Margit as a test dummy in the Altless Plateau, where I did take a few extra hits and opted to use Great Stars with Prayerful Strike. Did a fairly good amount of damage despite his 40% holy resistance, and were able to get a break in here as well. Not as damaging with the Great Stars, but as the video goes on, you'll see how critical hits and backstabs have improved greatly with patch 1.10. This is a welcome change for PvE, as stance breaks, especially on later journeys, have to be earned now. It used to be easier to stance break in the Flame of the Redmanes and big bonk breaking build days, but now they've slowed down some. It is much better now with the critical hits being made into a bigger deal with serious damage as a reward for the critical hits that you get. This means that we can make use of those times when we finally do get the break, even though they're a little bit more rare to come by than the initial launch days where posture breaking was relatively easy. The end of Godfrey Golden Shade here, as he took a critical hit for over 2,000 damage with the Executioner's Great Axe. As I mentioned, this is a fantastic weapon if you're looking for something heavy with an extra multiplier. It's got that 115 multiplier for the crit, and it put an end to him rather quickly. Let's get into buffs for this setup. It's a little bit different because we have the stance breaking tier, so what's going to happen here is we're going to use Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, then we're going to fill up our FP afterwards. Then we're going to drink our tier because the stance breaking tier only lasts about 30 seconds. And then after that, we can use Prayerful Strike or charged attacks to do massive poise damage. Let's get into equipment. This setup, we have the Executioner's Great Axe. We have it in Sacred Affinity with Prayerful Strike. In our offhand, you have Glintblade Phalanx if you want to add that as well. Any seal will do. Random set of armor on. Shard of Alexander, Sacred Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman, Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, and then we have the Stance tier and the Faith tier. Let's get into stats. By the way, if you're wondering why Morgott wasn't in here, I accidentally deleted him. It was just an error on my part. I'm still recording with my Xbox, but my PC is almost set up and ready to go. Now for stats here, we're mainly Faith focused, and obviously we want a good amount of vigor in mind as well, and you'll have a lot of versatility with this build because it is Faith based. And after that build, I'm going to show the next build, which gets critical breaks even sooner. This is a very, very powerful one in terms of being able to posture break and then take advantage of that because we'll have 110 multiplier on the straight sword that we're going to use, which is the Noble Slender Sword. And this is the Square Off and Glintblade Phalanx combo build that I really enjoy. For this, we took on a few dragons who have decent poise. This was especially noticeable here as the damage from a straight sword with the 110 critical hit modifier was substantial. The dragons were fairly easy to take care of with multiple posture breaks and significantly more damage. This field test here was when I first realized how good critical hits are now, and that patch 1.10 really upped the game and rewarded you for getting these big breaks. Larger enemies were easy to bring down with this setup since Square Off by itself is a poise destroyer, and Glintblade Phalanx added in makes things even easier. When you use Glintblades first and then you use Square Off, and I know you guys probably saw this build on my channel, you're looking at getting a total of 80 poise damage when first running into contact with an enemy. This is a huge deal. It's especially useful when it comes to later journeys because by New Game Plus 7, poise is about 30% more for bosses in terms of how it is to break them and such. It's going to be about 30% or so harder to break poise. It goes up just like damage does, just like their HP does. So in later journeys, getting in as much posture damage as you can is definitely essential to getting those big breaks and now that big critical damage. On another note, if you're not subbed to this channel, now is the time to sub, as I'll be doing more awesome Elden Ring builds upcoming and expanding upon the channel a bit. Speaking of which, as I mentioned I think once before, this will hopefully be my last weekend recording on Xbox, as the PC is set up and ready to start, although I have some learning to do in terms of editing and all that stuff. I'm going to learn how to do it, but I'm sure it's not too bad. Godskin Apostle here, I wanted to miss a critical hit and see if I noticed being able to break poise easier a second time. It was a little hard to tell when I ended up doing this, although according to the patch notes, if you miss a critical hit, you'll get another faster than you normally would before. This was one of 3 additional things that were added in patch 1.10, and I have a slide with the changes to go over towards the end of the video. Everything is timestamped below as usual, and this focuses on the PvE side of things for patch 1.10. So there was a ton of PvP changes, and if you want an update on that, I think I posted something on the community tab, but there's a lot of people covering that. I haven't done a lot of PvP lately, but as far as that stuff goes, the main difference is poise has changed a lot in PvP. I know some people are happy with it, some people are unhappy with it so far, but yeah, poise has changed a fair bit in PvP as of patch 1.10. For our PvE changes, I'm actually really happy with the changes here. For me personally, I think they're great. I think it's awesome to be rewarded with a bigger critical hit after you do get those posture breaks, especially since they nerfed poise across the board for PvE. Afterwards, at least when you do get those breaks, even if they're more rare to come by, you're getting rewarded substantially more for getting them by getting a lot more damage with those critical hits. Of other things, I've got a couple new builds coming up for you guys too, and there's one I'm really excited about that's going to be upcoming this weekend. Can't wait for that one. Last boss I wanted to show was a big dragon with good poise that I managed to break twice. It ended up being a really good clip, though I was only able to get 1 critical hit, as I would end up getting stuck a bit the second time. That can happen with the dragons on occasion if you can't get around to their head. And after we buff here, we're going to run into battle. But yeah, if you get a critical break on some of the dragons, because of the fact that they're so big, sometimes getting around to their head, where you obviously need to do the posture break for a lot of damage, especially since it is their head, so it's going to take increased damage. They do take increased damage to the head, but as I mentioned, sometimes they're just so big bodied that getting around to where you need to do the critical break can be a little bit of a challenge, and you'll end up seeing that on the second one. We do end up getting massive damage with the one we land, which makes the fight significantly easier. This was due to the build we were using, which does immense poise damage in combination with our update that now allows us to hit harder when it comes to the critical damage we've talked about throughout this entire video. Pretty amazing that they buff something like this, as it makes the game a tad easier in my opinion. If you get 2 breaks in any given fight, odds are you're going to win. This is abundantly true when utilizing builds that have additional critical hit modifiers. Something like the Misericordia, if I'm saying that right, and parrying can go a long way now. For the bosses, you can parry at the very least. Crazy as this sounds, even though this was a really PvP-centric patch, as far as the PvE part of it goes, it was actually huge. This is a huge patch. This can change the style of play for a lot of people because of the fact that you're rewarded so much with the critical damage being upped, that it can change the way you play the game. Unlike a certain weapon buff, spell buff, or occasional weapons getting nerfed, this could really change your outlook on any given boss fight, as it kind of pushes you to try to get those posture breaks, maybe build around that to get the additional damage they added. For me, I see that as a big deal. I see that as a huge addition. That's something that I'm going to look at and say, as you see me hopping around the dragon and not getting that finishing critical hit, that it's awesome that they added this. This is a big plus. A lot of the stuff they're doing lately feels like it's making the game a tad bit easier, but maybe that's the goal in the end, to get more people to play DLC, to get more people involved in Elden Ring. Speaking of which, I cannot wait till DLC. Feels like forever. I know we all feel that way. It is coming sometime soon, no doubt about that. Last thing to cover here is backstab damage has gone up. This is something that I actually thought should have been done, as backstabs should reward you a bit more. Thankfully they do now, and even at Gatefront I noticed more damage on the backstabs with just using a straight sword. It's a nice addition, and it can make dealing with smaller foes you sneak up on easier, as they'll likely be taken out in one hit. It's a pretty solid addition for backstabs in general, and something you can notice right away. We're going to go over the buffs and the whole build for this specific build if you want to get the additional posture breaks with this awesome build. Let's get into this now. And first things first, we're going to drink our tear. Then we're going to use Golden Vow. Then we're using Flame Grant Me Strength. Then you can fill up your FP. Then we can use Glintblade Phalanx with the offhand dagger. Then we have Square Off Charged Attack, Square Off Regular Attack. Let's get into equipment. Equipment, I had this on a quality build, so I had the Noble Slendered Sword quality with Square Off offhand. We had the Miséricorde with Glintblade Phalanx. We had the Fire Monk set on, Shard of Alexander, Erdtree's Favorite +2, Ritual Swords Talisman, Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman. Here's the Stance Breaking tier and the Faith tier for buffs. Let's get into stats. As far as stats go here, this was on my character that I last did a quality build on, that I was last doing quality builds. So I had 50 strength, I believe, 40 dex, and 50 vigor, but I was getting really good damage out of Noble Slender Sword with Square Off and the quality affinity. Turned out really solid in the end, and the charged attack on Square Off will give you 40 poise damage. So let's get into the slide. So, the major PvE changes for Elden Ring and patch 1.10, I'm going to timestamp this by the way, is increased critical hit damage across the board. So when you get those posture breaks, you're going to get an increase in damage. Decreased recovery time after you miss a critical hit. And then increased poise damage after that miss. So if you miss a critical hit, you can actually be rewarded by getting a second one faster. And then again, you get increased damage on those critical hits as well. Thanks for watching this PvE patch 1.10 update and the builds as well. I hope I explained it well while also showing some awesome builds you can use to get those breaks. Elden Ring is a fantastic game, and the fact that they're still balancing it now shows how big the game is and the future it has in store for us. Hopefully next patch comes with a DLC announcement date. Not on the Discord, now's the time to join that. There's over 500 people in there now. It's been an awesome growing community. If you need help with anything, you can reach out to me on there as well. And if you're not subbed and you love overpowered PvE builds or Elden Ring content in general, be sure to check out all the awesome builds that are on my channel. Thanks for watching, and as always, I will catch you guys there.